Okay, let's begin.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so I'm going to start off with a question, because I just finished watching the video of the last class.
How is the audio, by the way? Was it good enough?
Perfect.
Okay, because I didn't use, when my battery is almost dead, then I can't use the microphone. That's why. So my battery is dead again this week. So I'm not using the microphone. What was your question?
So we said the second Luchot don't have the floating letters.
Correct.
The floating inside. But they're also written by Hashem. The only difference is Moshe carved the stone, but Hashem wrote it.
Not in the same way. Mefashim say not in the same way as the first Luchot. In fact, there's a whole piece on this, maybe not for now, but that if we would have maintained the first Luchot, we would have been able to conquer death in this world, would have stopped, like it would have gone back to the way it was before eating from the Etz Hadat. And part of the reason that they say Al Pi Kabbalah was because what God did was when He handed us the Luchot and He carved the letters of the Torah through and through, the Luchot represented the earthiness of a person. And God had allowed us to learn Torah on a level where it could penetrate a person from one side to the other. So the earthiness of a person, the physicality, could have been completely imbued and penetrated by the words of Torah. What do we say about Torah? Etz Hayim Hi Mahazikim Ba. What was the other tree in Gan Eden? There was the Etz Hadat they ate from that brought death. The other tree was the Etz Hayim. What God gave them when He gave them the first Luchot was access to the Etz Hayim.
Wow.
And that's why God kicked them out of Gan Eden the first time. He says, well, you ate the Etz Hadat, now you're going to go run, eat the Etz Hayim and cheat death? Impossible, not happening. So He kicks them out of Gan Eden. But when the Jewish people earned the Torah that first time, they literally, the Gemara says, Paskazu Amatam, they went back to a stage of zero death, like it was before, zero Yetzer Hara, like it was before, before they ate from the Etz Hadat. Unfortunately, we then lost it only a short moments later with the bringing in of the Egel HaZahav, which is why it was such a tragedy that Moshe Rabbeinu had accepted the Erev Rav. Because if he had not brought the mixed multitudes from Egypt, then they would not have brought the Egel, which would not have tempted. Jews would not have had that temptation in and of themselves.
Who's the Erev Rav?
Erev Rav were the Egyptians that converted in mass and joined the Jewish people when they left. So God refers to them throughout the Torah. He refers to the Jewish people as my people. Erev Rav, Amecha, Shichet, Amecha. Lech red, go down. Ki shichet amecha, your people. What should you want my people? Right? You know what the answer is? It was the Erev Rav that God never told Moshe Rabbeinu to take out with them. So what we're looking at in the first Luchot was a fully imbued letter written by God, penetrating the physicality of a person completely, and that literally eradicated even the possibility of death. Because if the soul could penetrate through and through, the soul is completely is eternal. It doesn't deteriorate. Okay, let us begin. We are on page Gimel Amud Aleph, page 3A1. If you're following in the art scroll, we are roughly about, I would say, maybe half the page down, where the Gemara says Ve'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. The only problem is that the Gemara says those words a few times, like Ray pointed out to us last week. Okay, the Gemara says Ve'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Ve'item Rabbi Chia bar Abba. You see that? Right after Ela Shechachum, right after we read the idea that they forgot how to write those letters, and then were reminded by the people. So it's about maybe 5 lines down on this side, on the Gemara side, if you're following in the actual straight Gemara. Ve'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Ve'item Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and some people say it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Targum shel Torah, the Targum of the Torah that we know, that sits on the side of the Chumash, in every Chumash. So you see it written in Aramaic.
Right?
Who is that? It's the Gemara, Onkelos. So when you see Targum Onkelos at the top, it's not because he got the book, trademarked it, sold it on Amazon. Targum Onkelos is called Targum Onkelos because of this Gemara.
That's Shnai Mikra and Echad Targum. That's what you have to read. It's
Correct.
Not, right. It's not actually.
But when it says Targum Onkelos, I want to point this out. The Gemara here is telling us that this is who that was. Otherwise, it would just say Targum. Okay? And you'll see in a minute, because the Gemara is going to challenge that the origin source of this translation was Unkelis. Targum Shel Torah Unkelis Hager was the convert Unkelis. Who was Unkelis? We'll see maybe a little bit later on who Unkelis was. But Unkelis was a member of the Roman royal family. He was a nephew of this Roman Caesar. He converts to Judaism, becomes one of the great sages of the Jewish people, and he writes the Targum, the translation into Aramaic of the Torah. Okay, so all translations, one way or another, emanated from Unkelis, by the way. Okay, so Septuagint, etc., etc.
So just translation, no commentary?
A translation of the Pisukim into Aramaic. But there's many moments in the translation where the translation doesn't only say, Vayomer, and he said, it gives insight, it defines, it sharpens our understanding of what the verse is saying. It's not just a word-for-word translation side by side. Okay? Says the Gemara. Who did he get it from? Mipi Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yoshua. He learned it from his rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Targum Shel Nevi'im, the translation of the Nevi'im of the prophets. As we know, Tanakh is made up of Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, 24 books, which is the Bible, which is the prophets, which is the writings, okay? And Unkelis wrote the Targum, the translation on the Torah. What about the translation of the Nevi'im? Yonatan ben Uziel Amaro. Yonatan ben Uziel, he was the one that shared that translation. Who did he get it from? Mipi, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. These three Nevi'im prophets that actually have a sefer in the canon of the prophets. He received the translation of the Nevi'im from them. V'nizdaza'a Eretz Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael shook. 400 parsa al 400 parsa. 400 parsa by 400 parsa. Now this is super interesting because the commentators explain what's the Gemara giving you that measurement size for? Because that measurement size is the size of Eretz Yisrael. So that means that the entirety of Eretz Yisrael shook.
How big is that?
How big is the size of 400 parsa? The size of Israel.
Is it current? State of Israel or into Iraq?
No, it's the size of Israel. The size of halachic Israel. Okay? But as we'll see, again, not yet. Like as an example, Eilat is not halachically Israel.
Judea and Samaria is included?
Yeah, absolutely. Right? But there's certain parts that were added on after. You should just know, again, in another Masechet Gitin, the Gemara says, I'm glad nobody bites any.
You can't do that.
I'm glad nobody
That's
bites.
a rule.
When you see me smile, you know.
It was another Rabbi Fari.
Another Rabbi Fari. And some people say it was Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Fari. Either way, so the Gemara, see what I did there? Throwback. Okay. The Gemara in Gitin says that actually there was another part of land that was annexed to Eretz Yisrael and got all the laws of Eretz Yisrael. And what land was that? Da-da-da-da-da-da! Syria.
That's right.
David HaMelech conquered Syria. And he gave it the halachot, at least partial halachot, of Eretz Yisrael. It's Gemara in Gitin. Sorry?
Why did I think that Eretz Yisrael extended eastward?
Shem's a lot closer to Israel than Halab is.
Sorry?
Why did
You
I
can see
think
Shem
they
from the
extended
Golan
eastward?
based on that
Abraham
to
was
see Halab.
eastward, and I thought it was, towards Iraq.
What was?
Eretz Yisrael.
Eretz Yisrael is the footprint that it is now, but there's little more extensions of parts of the edges, which are a little bit more, a little bit less, which got either given or were not taken in wartime. Now, one of the things that's important to understand, and the second thing that I'm going to say is also Masechet Gitin. Masechet Gitin has a lot that talks about Eretz Yisrael. Parts of it talk about Eretz Yisrael, the halachas of Eretz Yisrael. Part of it talks about the destruction of the temples. We learn a lot about Eretz Yisrael from Masechet Gitin, okay? So the Gemara in Gitin also describes the idea that Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Tzivi, a land of the deer. And you think that's because there's deer in it, right? But that's not the reason. If you call a place deer just because there's a lot of deer, then deal would be called deer. But now, what do we call Eretz Yisrael? Eretz Tzvi. Why? Says the Gemara something remarkable. If you skin a deer, and then you take that deer, after you've skinned the deer, and you try and fit the skin back on the deer doesn't fit in its own skin. Because as it grows with the animal, there's an elasticity in it where it can cover whatever it is that's inside of it. Says the Gemara, so to Eretz Israel, that it miraculously expanded to be able to contain the Jewish people that lived in it. And the Gemara brings examples of places that are described that had this town had this and had that and this many people. And the other rabbi says, you're telling me that there was this 120,000 Jews here. I was in that place. I eyeballed it. There wasn't room for 120,000 reeds. Straight Gemara.
I always think of like people praying Amidah in the Beit HaMikdash. Like, like how do they bow and not bang into
That's what the Gemara says. Omdim tzifufim, they would stand, it was tight. Mishtachavim, because you take up more space standing than bowing. So all of a sudden, the guy says the name of Hashem, everyone who's stuffed like this, sardines, now has to take up 6 feet instead of 1 foot. And the Gemara says, Mishtachavim, Revachim. They would bow and they would become more space, extra space. So this was one of the miraculous features of Eretz Israel. By the way, if you want to understand, even today we are witnessing an element of this miraculous thing for Eretz Israel. Eretz Israel has only ever produced, and it was foretold in the Torah, that Eretz Israel would only ever produce for the Jewish people. Did you know that? Eretz Israel was conquered over 37 times since its original, the Jews entered into the land of Israel. Again, by Christians, by the Arabs, back, forth. It never produced for anyone but the Jews. If you go back to Israel, you read the writings of Mark Twain when he went to visit in the 1800s, he describes Eretz Israel. It makes you want to dig him up to stab him, because he speaks so badly about Eretz Israel, what a shambles the place was, how terrible it was. There's no more dreary place on earth. The ascent into Jerusalem is, the curse of a deity. He really talks about how terrible it is. And now you go to Eretz Israel, the whole place is booming. The desert is, the number 2 exporter of flowers in the world after Holland is Israel.
Oh, wow.
Is that not wild?
That's wild.
But there's many things like that just don't make any sense in the things that they've learned because the land, again and again and again. By the way, crazy thing to know, when they took Eretz Israel and they made those concessions and handed over these areas with farms in them, they handed them to the Arabs. They handed them back to the Arabs in the concessions after Oslo. After these concessions, they handed it back. These are places that are already developed. Go there now, dead as a doorknob.
Really?
Wild. Okay, let's...
Rabbi, when it says it shook, does that mean an earthquake?
So it's very interesting. It sounds like there's some sort of earthquake going on here, but I think what we're supposed to understand is that it's an earthquake. Normally, I don't know if you know how earthquakes work. How does an earthquake work?
The place.
There's a tectonic plate, okay? So you have a tectonic plate. They're sitting underneath the strata, right? Underneath the strata, right? Of what's it called? Of the earth. So what happens is, as they move, there opens up a schism, a chasm, depending on how big it is, and then along the fault line there's a tremors, and they're obviously much stronger in one place than they are in other places. But here it says that Eretz Israel shook 400 parsa by 400 parsa, which means that the whole of the country shook in the same way, which is again a miraculous occurrence, illustrating that what happened now was something that would affect each and every single Jew. Okay? When he translated the Nevi'im. Yatzita bat kol ve'amra. A heavenly voice came out and said, Mi hu zeh shegilas tarai lebnei adam. Who was it that revealed my secrets to the people? Amad Yonatan ben Uziel. Yonatan ben Uziel stands up. This is serious kahonas, by the way. If bat kol comes out and says, who revealed my secrets? Yonatan ben Uziel stands up and says, I'm the one that revealed your secrets to humanity. I'm thinking lightning bolt, right?
It's like funny, I got not that rain, I want different rain.
I want different rain. Too much. But we know about Choni Amaga that he had that relationship with God. Okay, so this is a shocking thing to come from Yonatan ben Uziel. But we'll see in a minute. I'll explain why. The Gemara continues and says, he says, I did it. But Galui v'yadua lefanecha, God, you know, absolutely revealed, clear. Shelo l'chvodi asiti. I didn't put it out so that I would get the citations or jobs or kabod. V'lo l'chvod bet Abba, not for my last name. Ela l'chvodecha asiti. I did this only for your kavod. Shelo yarbu machloket Yisrael, that there should not be machloket in explaining the different verses in the Nevi'im. Nevi'im is very difficult to learn properly, and there's things, if they're not translated correctly, could cause all sorts of problems of faith, of understanding, and the Jewish people would have been rent asunder by the machlokot that would have come out from the translation of those Pesukim. You like that one?
Can you explain to them what that means?
They said they went
Right
there.
over my head.
Rent is torn, asunder means one piece away from the other. Okay? The Gemara is explaining in that minute that he said, I did it for that, right? Yatzeta, sorry. Ve'od bikesh, therefore that's what I did it for. Okay? So we now understand why Yonatan ben Uziel was confident in standing up and saying it was me. Because what he was trying to say to God is, I know what you mean. I know I was not allowed to do that. I know that was overstepping my boundary, but it wasn't for me. It was only, and you who plumb the depths of every person's heart, of every person's mind, you know that it was not for my own kavod. I did this only for you, so that there should not be machloket amongst Israel. And you see how important shalom is, that he was willing, number one, to bear the wrath of God, but also that God considered that a good enough answer that Hashem said, okay, yes.
So, I heard from another rabbi, similar to what you just said, that the Nevi'im has a lot of contradictions in it, and that's why Yonatan did what he did.
Yes.
And he wrote the Targum.
Yes.
But do we learn the Targum when we learn the Navi?
So,
I never learned it.
So the answer to that is yes and no, and that's what I intimated earlier when I said that the Targum of Onkelos, even though many of us are not proficient in Aramaic, but all of these commentaries, they came from Onkelos. So I'll just give you an example. You're reading the Stone Chumash, correct?
Yeah.
Everyone here reads the Stone Chumash. They did a phenomenal job on that book. Where does the interpretations of the Stone Chumash come from? Anyone know? They say it right in the beginning, in the opening folio. What does it say? We have followed in our translation of this Chumash the interpretations of Rashi. Could you mute? Rafi. Yeah? In the opening folio it says, that it's the translations here are following the translations of Rashi. So if ever you see that the pasuk doesn't exactly match English and Hebrew, 9 times out of 10, look at Rashi, you'll see that Rashi said, even though it normally means this, here it doesn't mean that. Because it can't mean that because of these reasons.
Rashi Onkelos.
Rashi. But Rashi is based on, if you look, as he says all the time, he says, Ketargumo, 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 right? According to its translation. Who does he mean? Onkelos. So Rashi, who is known as the Pashtan, what does the Pashtan mean?
Simple.
The Pashtan, the one that follows the simple pshat, where was he getting his pshat from? Onkelos. So by proxy, almost every interpretation that we're reading, we talk about, the pshat of the Torah is coming from Onkelos.
Didn't Onkelos he got it from, it came from Hashem.
He came from
Didn't really come
Bimsorah, from Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, right?
I heard it came from before that.
So the Gemara says that he got it from Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua. So, right? We just read the Gemara.
Yeah, no, but keep reading.
Okay. Yes. Now, again, all we're going to say is we get the Gemara. The Gemara says B'Eliezer B'Yoshua, and we'll see exactly what that means in just a minute. Okay, but before we do that, there's one other bit which I want to inform you, which you might not have known unless you listened to another rabbi. There's a fascinating line over here. The Gemara then says that he then ups the ante. This Yonatan ben Uziel is playing poker with God. Hashem's like, who revealed my secrets? I don't know, that's not how he sounds. It's just, I imagine when Hashem's upset, he's not like, who revealed my... I'm just imagining that that's the voice, because as we say every Friday night, Kol Amonai Shover Arazim. What does that mean?
It breaks.
The voice of God shatters the cedars, the biggest trees, the tallest trees, the cedar trees. They would splinter and break when God would speak because of the power of God's voice. I'm imagining it's a voice like that. And Yonatan ben Uziel says, me, oh, it was me. But I didn't do it for me. I did it for you because there was going to be machloket amongst the Jewish people. Okay? I did it in your honor. Wait a minute. Fine. So Hashem's like, okay, guys, call off the strike. Don't kill him. Foxtrot number 0, whatever. Pull back on the bombers. We're going to clear him. What does he say? Now he wanted to then go ahead and do the Targum of Kitubim. What's he doing? Batko comes out and says, Yatzta Batko v'amralo, says to him, Dayecha, enough. Maitama, why'd they say enough now and not enough before? The Gemara answers, Mishum de'it be'ketz Mashiach. Because in Kitubim, specifically in Sefer Daniel, is hidden when Mashiach is going to come. He translates, Targum Yonatan ben Uziel would have translated Kitubim, you would have been able to figure out when Mashiach was going to come. What do I learn from that? Let's just pay attention to how underappreciated Targum Yonatan ben Uziel is on Nevi'im. If God is like, please don't do the whole translation thing on Ketuvim, because then it's going to be obvious. It's not just a translation. Okay, what he would have brought would have been able to unlock for us the knowledge of Ketz Shel Mashiach. What's wrong with that? Why shouldn't we know the time when Mashiach's going to come? Number one, okay, maybe not everyone deserves to know. Number two, we learned already by the time of Yaakov Avinu, excellent, that
They stopped it from telling you.
Bikesh Yaakov legalot et haketz. He wanted to tell them when Mashiach was going to come. V'nistaleka shechina mimenu, and the Shekhinah departed from him. Why? Imagine you tell the Jews, they're sitting there, guys, listen, Mashiach's going to be here in roughly 4,000. They give up.
Until
Go to
then,
McDonald's.
Yeah, exactly. Chalas, they're out. You know what? I have plenty of time. 6 more Gilguls between now and then, right? They would have given up. Imagine you're sitting there in the worst moments in Jewish history, and you think Mashiach's around the corner. That's what gets you through the day. You should just know. I heard this from numerous Holocaust survivors. They told me. They said that I was in Auschwitz, and when we were liberated by the soldiers, we started crying. And we said, "Why? You liberated?" They said, "Because we were absolutely sure that we were going to be liberated by the Shivatim, by Moshe Rabbeinu, by Eliyahu Hanavi. How could it get worse than the cataclysmic war that we just experienced? Wow. We were sure this was Gog and Magog. The gates would open, and we were going to be reunited with our families that had just perished. And the soldiers came in, and it broke our hearts." Imagine you tell a guy in Auschwitz, guys, got at least another 150, 200 years.
Could be part of Gog and Magog.
Sorry?
Could be part of
100% could be part of Gog and Magog. Or it could be Gog and Magog. One opinion that's brought down in Mifashim is it's a virus. It's not even a war. I was so excited when I heard that during Corona. All right. Either way, my friends, let's move on. If he would have done it, it would have been the end, okay? The Gemara says...
So Yonatan ben Uziel is not Onkelos, it's a different Perush?
Exactly. Yonatan ben Uziel is a different Pirush. He wrote the Targum on the Navi, okay? And what's it called? And that's what we're reading. That's what we read about it. And who did he get it from? Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. They were the ones that transmitted this to him. He didn't make it up himself. He got it from prior Nivi'im who explained those translations. Last bit that I want to say is why Yonatan ben Uziel over anybody else? Not just that. Let's read the next line. Okay? Where are we? No, sorry. The last line, Mishum de'it be'ketz Mashiach, because there's ketz Mashiach. Now, the only problem I just want to point out is that there is a Targum on Ketubim. So Targum on the Torah, Onkelos. Targum on Nevi'im, Yonatan ben Uziel. Targum on Ketubim, there is a Targum on the writings. There's no Targum on Daniel, which is where this was the problem, but that was not written by him. It was written by different Tanaim.
So why couldn't he write all the Targum except for Daniel?
Excellent. Why could he not write the Targum in other Sefarim? Let him write everything else. Very, very tough question to answer. I have a few theories. I don't know if you want to hear them. I have a few theories, but I don't have a proof for it yet. And my theory is based on the fact that the Gemara actually does not say where in Ketuvim it was, and the Gemara seems to say that Ketuvim as a whole would have been a problem. But it only would have been a problem if Yonatan ben Uziel did the translation. The fact that others did the translation meant that there was only one book. In other words, perhaps the answer is that in the Sefer of Daniel, it's very close to the surface. And any proper translation would have revealed that. But in the translation of Yonatan ben Uziel, we would have seen it not only in one place, in many places. And therefore, he was not allowed to write any of that. Why Yonatan ben Uziel more than anybody else? Does anyone know where Yonatan ben Uziel is buried? Yonatan ben Uziel is buried in Amuka.
No way.
That's him.
Wow.
What's up?
Amuka is
Amuka?
all the way down at the bottom, middle of nowhere, opposite Miron.
Right.
Very hard place to get to.
Wow.
And he promised anyone that would come to his kever that he would intercede on their behalf that they should get married.
Right.
My wife went there.
Why?
They just went there.
Because he himself never married.
Wow.
Yonatan ben Uziel
Yeah, right.
never married. Why not?
Translate.
His connection with Torah and learning was so strong.
Couldn't have this
That was
again.
his wife. He felt he could not.
Jonathan ben Uziel was Amuka? Or
Yes.
it's in Amuka?
No, Amuka is his grave. There's nothing in Amuka.
Wow.
All there is his grave.
Wow.
It's just a grave in the middle of nowhere.
I've been hearing about this for 5
P.S.
years.
P.S. There's a guy that I knew in London, okay? Anyway, we're talking about Amuka. He says, we went there with a group. He says, can I say a few words? Anyway, he says to the group, many years ago when I was single, I came here to Amuka to pray to get married and this, that, and the other. And we got married, and Baruch Hashem, we have a kid. And, thank God my prayers were answered. So everyone's like, wow, they're all thinking now we're going to go pray. He said, but that's not the end of the story. He said, the end of the story is after I got married and had a kid, we were looking through the family pictures, and I pulled out my old pictures, and I noticed that in the picture that I took of myself at Amuka, my wife is in the background.
That's
Psychotic.
Oh my God.
It's popular, like
Yeah, no, Amuka.
You're Dunsky.
well, I'm done.
You don't get to go there. I have other kibarim to send you to. So what am I saying? Why am I saying all this? Yonatan ben Uziel, whose connection to Torah was such a close connection, almost like the connection, an intimate connection like a person would have with their wife, what he would have revealed was on a much higher qualitative level than perhaps the other Tanaim that were not at his exalted level. Okay? Let's move on.
Sorry,
Yeah.
One question. Why was it going to be such a problem that they had to translate it? Like, what was going to be the arguments? Why did they feel like there was not going to be shalom unless they translated it?
So the answer to that is that in unlike Torah, where the Torah is very straightforward, there are elements in the Navi that are contradictory, that are dicey, that are difficult to understand. And the way you would translate the Pesukim, if you ever looked at Yonatan ben Uziel, you'll see something which is remarkable. It's very, very different than Targum Onkelos. We actually have a Targum Yonatan ben Uziel on the Torah. Did you know that?
No.
Could you get me a Mikraot Gedolot? Get me Mikraot Gedolot. Get me Mikraot Gedolot Shemot, please. So Targum Yonatan ben Uziel is fundamentally different than Targum Onkelos, okay? And in it, there's times when he tells you things that are just wild, like off the charts, Majnun, okay?
Is it translated into English?
I think yes. I think Art Scroll has. So as an example, see over here we have Onkelos, right there, long. So it's always on the side of every page, right there. In every, this is Mikraot Gedolot with all the different commentators. Yonatan ben Uziel. Okay. Now in Yonatan ben Uziel, the Gemara. Oh, this is Bamidbar. Okay, it doesn't matter. We'll do it another time. The Gemara tells us that Yonatan ben Uziel says that on the night when the Jewish people, could you get me a Shemot? Yeah, I just want to, because it's just magnificent. And this will really explain to you why we're so worried about Yonatan ben Uziel translating the Sefarim of Ketubim. Okay, Mikraot Gedolot Shemot.
Was
You got
he
one
Navi?
there? No, he was one of the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Okay, the Gemara says that the power of his Torah was so strong that when he was engulfed in Torah learning, if a bird would fly over his head, the bird would come engulfed in flames. This is not Mikraot Gedolot Megilla. Yeah, but this is Chok Israel. So we need a Mikraot Gedolot Shemot. All right?
When you say translate, you're
Yeah.
oversimplifying. It's really getting deeper.
Yeah, so Onkelos is more of a translation.
Right.
Here it's a
Sure.
translation, but it has
Commentary.
like a commentary almost, like a running
Right.
commentary with a depth and a profundity which is really, really special. If you can't find it, it's okay. We'll come back to it later. thought I saw one over here. Shemot. Found it? Okay. So just I want to show you something unbelievable. The Targum Yonatan ben Uziel says on this when the Jewish people are doing in this week's parasha. So I just wanted to give you a version of something. This one doesn't have Yonatan ben Uziel, so we're like batting 0 for whatever. Okay, so I'll just share it with you from memory. The Yonatan ben Uziel, when he's writing about the Korban Pesach, right, of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel, in Egypt, he says that when they did the Korban Pesach, God transported the entire Jewish people to Eretz Israel. They did the Korban Pesach. He brought them back to the land of Egypt, and they continued with their story in Egypt. That ain't no translation. So he's commentating on something. He's expressing something that maybe is true on a physical level, but it's much more likely true on a deep spiritual soul level. That when they were there, they weren't actually there. They weren't doing the Korban Pesach in that place. They were doing it in Eretz Israel, which is just a wild thing. There are other things like that he just casually throws into Pesukim, and you're like, what? So it's fascinating to read his translation. It says the Gemara as follows. V'targum shel Torah Unkelis Hager Amaro. You're telling me that the translation of the Torah was written by Unkelis the convert? What are you talking about? V'ha'amar Rav Ika bar Avin Amar Rav Chananel Amar Rav. Rav Ika bar Avin, who said in the name of Rav Chananel, in the name of Rav, Ma'dichti, what does the pasuk mean when it says V'yikreu b'sefer b'Torah ha'elokim meforash v'som sechel v'yavinu b'mikra? They read through the sefer of the Torah of God, meforash, clearly expressed, in other words, expressed meforash. That's why we say mefarshim, commentators. V'som sechel, you're placing wisdom, v'yavinu b'mikra, and they were able to understand the verses. Now the Gemara says, okay, what does this verse mean? Now, important that you understand, where is this verse coming from? It's coming from the sefer of Nehemiah. Okay? So Nehemiah is written is one of the last of the prophets. They're the ones that come into Eretz Israel. They're the ones that rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. Okay? The pasuk says, "Vayikreu b'sefer b'Torah Elohim." It's at the end of Ketuvim. Excuse me. The pasuk says, what does that mean? V'ikru b'sefer Torah Elohim. They read the sefer of the Torah of God. What does that refer to? That's the Torah itself. Meforash, explained. What does that mean? That's Targum, translated. V'som sechel, and they put wisdom. Wisdom was placed. What does that mean? Elah pesukim. Those are the verses. Pesuk means, and it's so interesting, when you say that a verse is called a pasuk, why is a verse called a pasuk? Anyone know?
Stop.
Excellent. Pasek means to stop, right? Sof pasuk, right, comes the end. So a pasuk is defined, it's delineated by the fact that it has an end. By the way, if someone is reading the Sefer Torah and they're just reading Vayomer Amonai Moshe lemor daber b'nei Yisrael v'talem suleh, right? You correct them for only the words that they read wrong. You don't correct the guy for the wrong timing, except for sof pasuk. That was solid gold.
Yeah.
Right? Except for sof pasuk. Okay? Except for sof pasuk. Why? Why do you think that is?
Changes the meaning.
Excellent. Changes the meaning. So as an example, if you read the pasuk straight and you carry on saying something else, it might mean something completely different. Okay? So let's take a look. So the Gemara says, so each bit of this pasuk we're dragging apart. One bit is the Bible, the Torah itself. One bit is the Targum. One bit is Som Sechel, is the Pesukim, which help us have the wisdom, the knowledge of the verses themselves. Ve'avinu b'mikra elu piskei ta'amim. That refers to the ta'amim themselves. The ta'amim, by the way, even though it's not a sof pasuk, elements of the ta'amim also help you understand how to read the pasuk. Rafi once said to me a while back that it's much better to read the Tehillim according to the ta'amim, the way they used to read them. Cham Baruch, etc., would read them to the community, right? Remember how he would read, right? Remember that, right? You read exactly. Anyone that went to Mag David, they would play it over the loudspeakers, him reading Tehillim. You read it that way. You have not just the Sof Pasuk, but as an example, you have an Atnach. An Atnach is like a pause, like a comma, right? A yetib, as an example. Certain things tell you that there's a pause in the pasuk, and this bit is separated from this bit. As I always say, punctuation can be the difference between life and death. The difference between let's eat grandma and let's eat, grandma. Right? One way you're a cannibal. The other way, you're having yabra. Okay, says the Gemara. Ve'amrila, and some people say, Elu hamasoret. It doesn't mean sof pasuk. It doesn't mean the ta'amim. It means the nikudot. It means other elements of how you read the word. So as an example, sometimes you arrive at a word and you read the word differently than the word is in the text. Okay? So you read the... Sorry? Exactly. But even simpler than that. Sometimes you have something that looks like a who, and how do you read it? He. Where'd you get that from? That's masoret. That's a tradition that's handed down.
Pronounce Hashem's name.
That's already a dirash.
Right.
I'm talking about when you're reading about the Na'ara HaMe'orasa, that whole he, who, he, it keeps going back and forth, right? It says Na'ara without a hey, you read it with the hey, it's so many things like this. Those are masoret, okay? Let's continue. So the Gemara says, 1 second, you just got finished telling me Onkelos was the one that gave us Targum. I just got finished telling you from a pasuk in Nehemiah that they were able to read the Torah with the Targum. Nehemiah is when the Jewish people returned to Israel in the aftermath of Cyrus and Darius. In the aftermath of the Persian exile and the story of Purim. Ezra and Nehemiah take the Jews back up, they build a second temple. When is Onkelos living? Way into the second temple. Because remember, what did I tell you? He's the nephew of the emperor. Which emperor specifically?
Some Caesar, you said.
Hadrian.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Adrianus Caesar. So Hadrian. So the time of the destruction of the temple, that's when Onkelos lives. And the guy sends his soldiers to bring his nephew to kill him because he's converted to Judaism. And every time he sends the soldiers, Onkelos converts him to Judaism because he gets him on his side. This guy is the sickest outreach rabbi ever. The last time, what happens? Crazy story. Last time, they bring the soldiers, come. Onkelos Hadrian says, don't listen to one word he says. If he talks, you're going to be Jewish. They say, okay, no words. He says, no words. Okay, he's walking out. As he walks out, he stops, he kisses the mezuzah. They were, what are you doing? Okay, all right, go for it. Tell us. He says, our God, our king is not like your king. With you, the guards, they protect the king. They stand outside and they protect the king inside. But our God, he protects our door. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. They all converted.
Oh my gosh.
Crazy. That's Onkelos. Okay? Now, so the Gemara is saying, hold up. A pasuk in Nehemiah describes Targum. You're telling me that came from Onkelos, which is almost 400 years later. Because the second Beit HaMikdash lasts for how long? 420 years. He's at the destruction of it. Okay? Adrianus Caesar, when is he in the lineage? He's the Caesar, the emperor, who's the emperor in Rome, while Titus, okay? Adrianus was followed by Aspasianus, he's followed by Vespasian. So it's Hadrian, if I'm not mistaken, it's Hadrian, then Vespasian, okay? And after Vespasian, it's Titus. So Titus is the general under Aspasianus Caesar. So that means it's right there by the destruction of the second temple. So if you already have Targum 400 years earlier, how could you tell me Onkelos wrote it? Gemara answers, Shechachum v'chazeru v'yizdum. They forgot the Targum, and then it was remembered, it was brought out again, expounded upon again, v'yizdum, and they instituted it again through Onkelos. Okay? Now, what I don't know, I have a simple question. I'm not sure why the Gemara needs to give this answer. Can I explain why? What did you tell me earlier? Did Onkelos do this himself? No. Right? Who did he get it from? Mars. Who did he get it from?
Onkelos?
Yeah.
The three...
No, that was the other.
No, that's the other guy.
The first guy gets it from Rabbi Eliezer,
Rabbis.
and Rabbi Eliezer and his rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua. Remember? Those are his two rabbis. That means that this was something that was handed down to him. What did he do that you're saying it was him and not Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua?
Codified it.
He wrote it down. So why do you need the answer that the Gemara gives? Oh, it was around before. Yeah, it was around before, just not written down. You don't like my answer. You got the question?
I mean, obviously, it was there before because how else would it have been handed down to him?
Yeah, but I would not have thought otherwise because the Gemara already told me that it was Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua that taught him this. Now, if they made it up, then if they were the ones that kind of came up with it, then the Gemara should have said that Targum comes from Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua. But if in the same breath that you told me that Unkelis is the one that was mitaken, then you tell me he got it from Rabbi Eliezer, that means that he was the one that wrote it. He got it from someone else. So who cares that you have an origin source 400 years prior? Those are the people who taught it to the people who taught it to Unkelis.
It just matters that he wrote it down.
Just matters he wrote it down. I did not understand why the Gemara is forced to decide that there was a moment in time that it was actually forgotten. I don't know why.
Did he do anything other than write it down, or did he interpret it?
He had an amazing overhand serve. He was a fantastic tennis player. What do you mean?
I'm saying, did he, rather than just write down, passing it down and putting it down, did he interpret it all? Maybe the words were different. Maybe.
So there's definitely things that he brings to it in his translation. 100%. 100%. But at the same time, there's no, I don't know what just happened. What just happened? Join?
Zoom ends 45 minutes in.
You will have to leave this meeting to join the new meeting.
Yeah.
No, I'm just going to cancel
be a
it.
time-
We're almost finished anyway. Okay. Let's finish up.
Zoom time.
Okay? So the Gemara says Shechachum v'chazeru v'yisdum. They forgot it, and then it was again reinstated once again. Okay. Now says the Gemara. By the way, again, this is a little bit difficult to understand, because what does that mean? Who forgot it?
Yeah, why is everyone forgetting stuff?
Who forgot it?
The people?
Part of the reason why they're forgetting, by the way, is
they didn't write it
because
down.
is because of the persecution. What's going on in this time of Onkelos?
People aren't allowed to study.
With Rabbi Akiva, why is Rabbi Akiva literally
They're hiding
killed
in
publicly?
caves.
They can't learn.
Because they forbid the teaching of Torah in public. So you want to know why they're forgetting Torah? Because you're not how to teach it.
And they're being killed.
And they're being killed. You have Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, probably could have told you a lot about the Torah. Slight problem, Haddad's living in a cave in the mud up to his neck. And they have not yet invented Zoom. So how's he going to clarify anything?
Fair enough.
So that's the Chazru v'Yizdum, okay? Let's continue. Gemara says, Maishna, we said earlier that when Yonatan ben Uziel translated the Nevi'im, the Eretz Israel shook 400 parsah by 400 parsah. Maishna deoraita de lo is daza, ve'ad Nevi is daza. How come on the Torah, Eretz Israel did not shake? And on the Nevi, the translation on Nevi'im, that caused Eretz Israel to shake. The Gemara says, deoraita mifresh milta. In the Torah, everything is said in a very clear way. And therefore, the Targum, which is translating something which is clear, is not revealing something that was not meant to be clear and understood. The Nevi'i, but the Nevi'im, Ika Amili de Mifrashan. In the Nevi'im, there are certain things which are very clear to understand. The Ika Amili de Misteman, there are certain things that are very hidden and not meant to be understood. And when you come along with the Targum, something that was meant to be hidden and meant to be private was now revealed. Let me just give you one example of what this means. There are words in Hebrew that have multiple meanings and multiple layers of meaning. So what do? I give you a word that could mean this, it could mean this. And therefore you have no idea definitively if this was what it meant or that was what it meant. And that was on purpose. A lawyer will tell you that sometimes your greatest tool in writing a contract is practiced ambiguity. Leave it unclear. Why? If you write it clear, the other guy's going to fight it. You don't write it, you have no claim. But if you write it in an ambiguous way, I'm not revealing anything here, right? What do? You've created a space to then later on be able to argue that the interpretation, create settlements, to create its issues where there's a pathway forward because look, it's clearly mentioned in the contract, but not defined. And then at that stage, we have something to be able to stand on in the future. Says the Gemara, okay? So when when something like that is hard translated, where it could have meant this and it could have meant that, and then comes Targum and says, it means this, you just took away any of that fog, any of that shade that was actually designed to be there in the first place. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Give me an example. Dichtiv. ביום ההוא יגדל המספד ירושלים כמספד הדרימון בבקעת מגידון. In that day, right, there was a tremendous morning in Yerushalayim, just like the morning of Hadad Rimon in the valley of Megidon. Okay, V'amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, "Ilmale targuma dahai kara lo yadana mai ka'amar." Without the targum on that pasuk, I would not have had any idea what was happening. Biyomahu, what does it actually mean? Because we don't know what this. This is a morning as great as that morning. Mabarif. I don't know what that morning was. I don't know what the story was. Biyomahu, on that day, the Targum explains, Yizgeh misped Yerushalayim. There was a tremendous morning in Jerusalem. Ki misped de Achav bar Amri. Like the morning that they had for Achav, the son of Amri. De ketal yateh Hadad Rimon ben Tav Rimon b'Ramot Gilad. Who, this guy, Achav, he was killed by Hadad Rimon, the son of Tav Rimon, in Ramot Gilad, in the heights of Gilad. Ukim mispeda, and like the morning, the Yoshia bar Amon, like this, the morning of Yoshia ben Amon, the Kitilia te Paro Chagira, who killed the Paro, who had a limp, bibikat Megiddo, in the valley of Megiddo. So what did we do? We had a pasuk that was telling you the extent of this morning, and it then tells you it combines two completely isolated stories. Like it says Hadad Rimon, right? Bibikat Megidon. Hadad Rimon has nothing to do with Megidon. It's Hadad Rimon, period. And also what happened in Megidon when Yoshia ben Amon killed Paro, the cripple. Okay? Now, they all, in each case, they understood that the results of that were going to be catastrophic, and the people were devastated by the turn of events. So the Gemara is explaining, here's an example of a pasuk that you looked at it, you have no idea what it's talking about, and the Targum comes along and fills in all the blanks and gives you something you never would have had if you just would have looked at the pasuk. Okay? Let's finish. Let's finish here, because the Gemara then continues and expounds on more different pasukim that are going to fall into this character. We are on 3A1. Hazaku Baruch.